There's a very specific kind of silence that exists on a ranch at 6 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday, a heavy, golden silence that smells like dew and coffee and the promise of a day that belongs entirely to you. It's the kind of peace people pay thousands of dollars to find on vacation. But for me, it was just home. At least it was until exactly 6:42 a.m. when the world exploded. I wasn't woken up by a rooster or a gentle breeze rattling the window pane. I was shocked into consciousness by the mechanical scream of a high-performance ATV engine tearing through the atmosphere right outside my bedroom wall, followed by the sickening crunch of gravel being sprayed against my siding like buckshot. I shot out of bed, heart hammering against my ribs, already knowing exactly who it was before my feet even hit the floorboards, because this wasn't a one-time emergency or a lost traveler. This was Brenda. Brenda, with her rhinestone-encrusted helmet and a sense of entitlement, so dense it probably had its own gravitational pull, had decided once again that my private, quarter-mile driveway was her personal express lane to the main road. I stumbled on the front porch wearing nothing but a pair of flannel pajama pants covered in cartoon moose, ignoring the morning chill because the heat of my anger was doing a fine job of keeping me warm. And there she was. I watched her figure disappearing down the curve of my land, a cloud of dust billowing behind her like a toxic cape. And just before she vanished around the bend, she raised one gloved hand in a lazy, dismissive wave, not a wave of thank you, not a wave of sorry, but the kind of wave a queen gives to a peasant she's just splashed with mud. I yelled something incoherent about private property, my voice cracking in the morning air, but her engine drowned it out effortlessly, leaving me standing there with clenched fists and a realization that settled in my gut like a stone. This wasn't going to stop unless I made it stop. See, this had been going on for 38 days. 38 days of Brenda, who lived in the shiny new Oak Creek Estates development that bordered my ranch, treating my land like a public easement because her own driveway was, in her words, too steep and scary for her morning joyrides. She had actually argued with me the week prior, standing by my mailbox with her hands on her hips, claiming that because my driveway connected to a county road, it was morally, if not legally, public property, and that a gentleman wouldn't mind sharing his dirt with a lady in a hurry. I went back inside, poured a cup of coffee that I was too wired to drink, and stared out at the pasture where my herd of 50 cattle was grazing, completely unbothered by the human drama unfolding nearby. That's when it hit me, a thought so simple and yet so diabolically perfect that I actually started laughing in my empty kitchen. Brenda treated my driveway like a racetrack because it looked like a racetrack. It was wide, flat, and open, but what if it wasn't a road anymore? What if legally and physically it became something else entirely? I looked at my cows, specifically at Big Bertha, a 1,200-pound Hereford with a stare that could curdle milk and a stubborn streak wider than the Rio Grande, and I realized that Brenda wasn't fighting a man anymore. She was about to go to war with agriculture. I grabbed my keys, drove to the hardware store, and bought a stack of livestock crossing signs, heavy gauge wire, and 4 sturdy gate hinges, deciding right then and there that my driveway was about to become a cow pasture that just happened to have some gravel underneath it. By noon, I had the plan in motion. I printed out a formal notice, laminated it, and hammered it onto a wooden stake right in the center of the driveway. The text reading, private property, active livestock zone, no trespassing, bold black letters on a white background that you would have to be legally blind to miss. I spent the rest of the afternoon reinforcing the perimeter fence, not to keep people out, but to funnel my cows in. I was tightening the last wire on the western fence line when I heard it again, that high-pitched, angry whine of a 2-stroke engine approaching from the subdivision. It was late afternoon. The sun was casting long shadows, and here came Brenda, ripping across the grass verge to bypass the ditch, heading straight for my driveway for her evening return trip. She saw the sign. I know she saw it because she didn't slow down. She sped up. She swerved her bright red ATV at the last second, spraying a wave of dirt over my freshly polished boots, and clipped the edge of the sign with her rear tire, snapping the wood stake with a loud crack that sounded like a gunshot. She killed the engine about 50 feet away, sliding to a halt and flipping her visor up to reveal eyes that were narrowed into slits of pure annoyance. "You're creating a hazard," she screamed, her voice shrill enough to startle a crow off the telephone line. You can't put obstacles in the middle of a thoroughfare. I could have crashed. I walked over, picking up the splintered remains of my sign, and tried to keep my voice level, though the urge to scream was clawing at my throat. Brenda, I said, this isn't a thoroughfare. It's a driveway. It's my driveway, and you are trespassing again. She let out a laugh that was sharp and humorless. Oh, get over yourself. My HOA bylaws clearly state that adjacent easements are to be accessible for community flow and emergency egress. You are blocking a community resource. I stared at her, genuinely marveling at the mental gymnastics required to believe that a homeowners association in a subdivision I didn't live in somehow had jurisdiction over a ranch that had been in my family since 1950. Your HOA has about as much power here as a Blockbuster video membership card, I told her. This is private agricultural land. If you come back, I'm calling the sheriff. Brenda rolled her eyes so hard I thought she might pull a muscle. Call them, she sneered. I'll tell them you blocked a woman's only safe route home. See who they believe. And with that, she fired up her engine, revving it aggressively until a cloud of blue smoke enveloped us both, and tore off toward the main road, kicking up a final insult of gravel in her wake. I watched her go, dusting off my shirt, and realized that diplomacy was dead. She had killed it. And honestly, I was relieved, because now I didn't have to be nice. I walked into the barn, grabbed a bucket of grain, and looked at Big Bertha and the rest of the herd. Ladies, I said, shaking the bucket, tomorrow morning, we're having breakfast on the go. The next morning, I was up before the sun. The sky was a bruised purple, transitioning to a soft orange, and the air was crisp. I worked quickly, setting up a temporary electric wire, not hot enough to hurt, just enough to guide, along the edges of the driveway, effectively turning the gravel strip into a chute. Then I opened the main paddock gate and rattled the grain bucket. 50 cows are surprisingly quiet when they walk, a soft, rhythmic thudding of hooves. But when they stop, they become an immovable wall of beef. I lured them right into the middle of the driveway, specifically the narrowest point between two large oak trees, and poured the grain in long, winding piles directly on the gravel. Then, I turned on the hose and created a massive, glorious mud slick right at the entrance, a mixture of water, dirt, and fresh cow manure that was slicker than ice and smelled like justice. I didn't have to wait long. At 6:45 a.m., the sound of the ATV pierced the morning air. I leaned against the fence post, sipping my coffee, and waited for the show. Brenda crested the hill doing at least 40 miles an hour, her helmet gleaming, expecting a clear run. What she found instead was a wall of brown hides and chewing jaws. She slammed on the brakes, her tires locking up, and she skidded sideways, coming to a halt just inches from Big Bertha's flank. Bertha didn't even blink. She just turned her massive head, a stalk of grass hanging from her mouth, and stared at Brenda with the bored indifference of a creature that weighs 1,500 pounds and knows it. What is this? Brenda screamed, flipping her visor up. Are you insane? Move these animals. I walked out from behind the tree, mug in hand. Morning, Brenda. Can't do that. This is a designated livestock feeding zone now. Federal agriculture laws are pretty strict about interrupting a herd during feeding time. I have a brunch meeting in 20 minutes, she shrieked, revving her engine as if the noise would scare them. Move them, or I will sue you for obstruction of traffic. It's not traffic, I said, taking a sip of coffee. It's a farm, and you're trespassing in a pasture. She tried to inch forward, nudging her front bumper against Bertha's leg. That was a mistake. Bertha, annoyed by the plastic prodding, swung her head sideways and bumped the ATV. It wasn't a violent hit, just a gentle reminder of physics, but it was enough to rock the vehicle violently to the left. Brenda screamed, clutching the handlebars like she was holding onto a life raft in a hurricane, her face draining of all color. They're attacking me, she yelled. You trained them to kill me. They're eating breakfast, Brenda, I called out. But if you keep poking them, they might decide you're a predator. I wouldn't risk it. She looked at the mud, looked at the cows, looked at me, and finally, for the first time in 38 days, she realized she couldn't win this round. She screamed a profanity that made the cows pause their chewing, spun the ATV around, getting her rear tires stuck momentarily in the manure mud I prepared, and peeled out back toward her subdivision, her pristine white riding boots now speckled with brown sludge. I smiled, patted Bertha on the neck, and called the sheriff's non-emergency line to file a formal trespassing report, attaching the video I had just filmed on my phone. But I knew Brenda. I knew her type. This wasn't a victory. It was just the opening shot. She wouldn't take this lying down. She would regroup, she would escalate, and she would come back harder. And I was right. The next day, she didn't come alone. I was out checking the fence line when I heard the roar again. Not one engine, but three. I looked up to see Brenda leading a phalanx of ATVs. Flanking her were two others, a younger guy in a sleeveless shirt who looked like he'd rather be playing video games, and a woman with a clipboard strapped to her handlebars. They bypassed the main driveway entrance, cutting across a strip of public utility grass to enter my land from the side, effectively flanking the herd. They pulled up in a V formation like a budget biker gang. Brenda killed her engine and pointed a finger at me. "I brought witnesses," she announced triumphantly. "This is Susan from the HOA Safety Committee, and she is here to document your illegal blockade." Susan, the clipboard lady, adjusted her glasses and started scribbling furiously. "Sir," she said, using a tone usually reserved for unruly toddlers, "we are noting that you are creating a hostile environment for community transit. This is a violation of neighborhood cohesion." I laughed. I couldn't help it. Neighborhood cohesion? Susan, look at where you're standing. You're standing in a cow pie, on private property. Susan looked down, gasped, and lifted her foot. Sure enough, she had parked right in a fresh pile. "This is irrelevant," Brenda shouted. "We are establishing a precedent of usage. If we ride through here enough times, it becomes a public right-of-way. My lawyer told me that." "Your lawyer is an idiot," I said, "and you're about to meet someone who actually knows the law." As if on cue, a dust cloud appeared on the main road. It was a sheriff's cruiser. Deputy Miller pulled into the driveway, dodging the cows with practiced ease, and stepped out. He was a man who looked like he had seen everything and was tired of all of it. Brenda's face lit up. "Finally, officer, arrest this man. He is trapping us with dangerous beasts." Deputy Miller looked at the cows, looked at the ATVs, and then walked over to me. "Jack," he nodded, "got your video yesterday. Is this the woman?" "That's her," I said. "And her friends." Miller turned to Brenda. "Ma'am, get off the vehicle." "Excuse me." Brenda sputtered. "I am the victim here." "You are trespassing," Miller said, pulling out his notepad. "I have video evidence of you ignoring posted signs. I have a statement from the landowner. And now I have you and your friends joyriding in a livestock pasture." "But the HOA," Susan started. "The HOA stops at the property line." Miller cut her off, his voice hard. "This isn't a debate club. Ma'am, here is your citation for criminal trespass. If I have to come back out here, I'm impounding the ATVs, and you're going for a ride in the back of my car." He handed Brenda a yellow slip of paper. She stared at it like it was a piece of radioactive waste. She looked at me, her eyes burning with a hatred so pure it was almost impressive. She snatched the ticket, crumpled it into her pocket, and signaled her crew to turn around. "This isn't over," she yelled over the engine noise. "You think you can hide behind a badge? I have resources you can't even imagine." She spun around, spraying mud all over Susan's clean khakis, and tore off. I thought that might be the end of it. A citation usually scares off the casual jerks. But Brenda wasn't a casual jerk. She was a professional. The next morning, the drones arrived. I was drinking coffee on the porch when I heard a buzzing sound, like a swarm of angry hornets. I looked up and saw it, a white quadcopter hovering about 20 feet above the driveway. It had a camera, and dangling from it was a long, red ribbon, flapping in the wind. Brenda was standing on the hill in her backyard, remote in hand, dive-bombing the cows. She was trying to spook them. She wanted to cause a stampede, prove they were dangerous, and force the county to make me remove them. The cows were agitated. They were mooing, stomping, bunching up against the fence. That crossed the line. You can mess with me, you can mess with my driveway, but you do not mess with my animals. I ran to the barn and grabbed the garden hose. I had installed a high-pressure nozzle for cleaning equipment. I waited. She brought the drone lower, trying to slap Big Bertha with the ribbon. I turned the nozzle to jet and aimed. The stream of water arched through the air, glittering in the sunlight, and caught the drone dead center. The propellers hit the water, the electronics shorted, and the machine spiraled out of death, crashing spectacularly into the deepest, wettest part of the mud pit. Brenda screamed from the hill. It was a sound of pure anguish. That was $1,000. You destroyed my property. It was invading my airspace and harassing livestock. I yelled back, "Come and get it if you want it, but bring your boots." She didn't come get it. Instead, she escalated to nuclear war. That afternoon, a yellow truck pulled up. County road maintenance was stenciled on the side, but it looked fake. 3 guys hopped out with surveying equipment. Brenda was with them, pointing at my fence line. I walked down there with my deed in my hand. "Can I help you?" "We're here to survey the easement," the foreman said, looking uncomfortable. "Lady says the property line is actually 50 feet that way." He pointed into the middle of my pasture. "Does she now?" I unroll my map. This is the plat map from 1952. This is the county survey from last year. And this, I pointed to the fence, is the line. The foreman looked at the map, then at Brenda. "Ma'am, this guy's paperwork is solid. We can't survey private land without a court order. I'm paying you double." Brenda hissed. "Find me the loophole. I'm not losing my license for you." "Lady," the foreman said. He packed up his tripod and signaled his guys. "Sorry to bother you, sir." They drove off. Brenda was left standing alone at the gate. She looked deranged. Her hair was coming loose from her ponytail. Her face was red, and she was vibrating with rage. "I will bury you," she whispered, pointing a manicured finger at me. "I will bring the whole world down on this little farm." "Brenda," I said softly, "go home." She didn't go home. She went to prepare for the final battle. The next morning, the air felt heavy. The cows sensed it. They weren't grazing. They were standing in a tight cluster near the driveway, watching the hill. I doubled the feed, reinforced the gate hinges, and waited. At 8 a.m., I heard it, a roar that shook the windows. I stepped onto the porch and saw them. It wasn't just 3 ATVs this time. It was a convoy. There were 6 of them, a mix of neighbors she had likely lied to, maybe some hired hands. They were lined up at the top of the ridge like a mechanized cavalry. Brenda was in the front, wearing a new, tinted helmet, revving her engine until it screamed. She raised her hand and then dropped it. They charged. They came down the hill in a flying wedge, tearing up the grass, heading straight for the driveway. They planned to punch through. They thought that if they came fast enough and loud enough, the cows would scatter and they would claim the road by force. But they didn't know about the gate release. I had rigged a remote latch on the secondary pen I'd built overnight. Inside were the calves and the younger steers, the ones that like to run. As the ATVs hit the gravel, I hit the button on my key fob. The side gate swung open. 20 energetic, curious, and heavy young cattle spilled out onto the driveway, filling the gap instantly. The ATV convoy slammed on their brakes. It was chaos. Tires screeched, gravel flew. The lead rider, a guy in a neon vest, swerved to avoid a calf and put his ATV directly into the ditch. He went over the handlebars, softly, landing in a patch of tall grass. Brenda tried to brake, but she hit the mud slick, the glorious, manure-filled trap I had been cultivating for days. Her ATV spun 180 degrees, sliding backward, and sank up to the axles in the muck. The engine sputtered and died. The rest of the riders collided with each other in a slow-motion pileup of plastic and metal. Nobody was hurt, but they were trapped. And then the cows closed in. They weren't attacking. They were just curious. They surrounded the ATVs, sniffing the helmets, licking the plastic, mooing in the faces of these suburban invaders. Brenda was screaming, trapped in her mud-bound vehicle, as Big Bertha leaned over the handlebars and let out a long, wet moo right into her face. That's when the sirens started. I had called Deputy Miller 20 minutes ago, the second I saw them gathering on the hill. He rolled in with two backup cruisers. The lights flashed blue and red against the morning sun. Miller stepped out, adjusting his belt, and looked at the scene. He looked at the ATVs stuck in the mud. He looked at the cows licking the trespassers. He looked at Brenda, covered in sludge, screaming about her rights. He walked over to the mud pit. "Brenda," he said, his voice carrying over the mooing, "you have the right to remain silent. I suggest you start using it." They had to use the winch on the patrol car to pull her ATV out. They handcuffed her right there in the driveway. The other riders were given citations and a stern lecture about following crazy people into felonies. As they walked Brenda to the patrol car, her boots squelching with every step, she looked at me. The entitlement was gone. The rage was gone. She just looked tired, defeated, and very, very messy. "Why?" she asked, her voice cracking. "It was just a driveway." "No," I said, leaning on the fence post next to Bertha. "It was my home, and you never asked. You just took." She lowered her head and got into the back of the cruiser. The aftermath was quiet. The legal system moves slow, but it moves heavy. Brenda pled guilty to criminal trespass, harassment, and reckless endangerment. She had to pay fines, pay for the damage to my land, and sell her ATV. Rumor has it she moved out of Oak Creek Estates about 3 months later. I guess the shame of being defeated by a herd of Herefords was too much to bear. I eventually took down the extra fences. I let the mud dry up, but I left the livestock crossing sign up. It's full of bullet holes now, metaphorical ones, and it serves as a reminder. People in town still talk about it. They call it the Battle of Bovine Ridge. Sometimes, when I'm in a feed store, someone will buy me a coffee and ask if the legend is true. I just smile and tell them that good fences make good neighbors, but 1,000 pounds of stubborn beef makes for excellent security. I still sit on my porch every morning. The silence is back. The golden light hits the gravel, and the cows graze peacefully. But every now and then, when the wind blows just right, I swear I can hear the phantom whine of an ATV engine, and I look at Big Bertha, and she looks at me, and we both know we held the line. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? We all have boundaries. We all have that one line in the sand that we think nobody will cross. But there's always someone like Brendo out there, revving their engine, waiting to test you. So what about you? Have you ever had a neighbor who thought what was yours was theirs? Did you fold, or did you fight back? Did you use a lawyer, or did you use a cow? Tell me your story in the comments. I read every single one, because if there's one thing I've learned, it's that the best justice is the kind served muddy.